preparation. And in preparation for that, it's a pleasure to invite Mr. Bhrugu Baxipatra, who is the host of that Congress, to say a few words as a words of welcome to this webinar. Over to you, Mr. Baxipatra. You're muted.
I'm so sorry.
Looks like he's frozen.
Hello?
Sorry, now we can hear you.
Okay. Good evening, everybody. Good evening, Rajesh, once again. In fact, as Rajesh has said, this is the second day of the two-day webinar series that we are having. The background is the Odisha Environment Congress. And this is an annual event which is held every year in the state of Odisha. Odisha Environment Congress started in 2010 by a group of people who are alert about the environment and the changes in the climate. Primarily, it was introduced to all of us by Mr. Sudarshan Das, who is the organizing secretary of the organization. The unique part of this event is that every year we have a theme-based convention. We have had environment and biodiversity, environment and climate change, environment and Gandhi, environment and mining, environment and I think we have our theme, environment and tribes. Now, why environment and tribes? Because we feel that the tribes and the indigenous people who consider nature to be sacred to them, and who are the ones who keep a balance and in turn get a water, fertile soil, food, shelter, medicine, everything is from the environment that they live in. However, today we feel like all of you must have realized that their lives, their survival, the chances of development, the knowledge, the health conditions, everything is now under threat due to large industrial activities, toxic wastes, forced migration, and all of it. So basically, Odisha Environment Congress is a platform where we bring in researchers, policymakers, experts, social activists, people from various fields, and this is a platform where we exchange their knowledge, their experiences, and try to take it forward. Likewise, this year too, we are doing the same. But there is a change in the last 3 years. We have been trying to involve an academic institution to be part of this Congress. So it's always a university. And this year, the Central University in Koraput, in Odisha, has been kind enough to host us and to partner with this Congress. At the outset, I would like to thank Rajesh and his team for giving us this space where we could interact and let people know about the Odisha Environment Congress and interact with people who are trying to do the same thing as we are trying to. We are expecting that through this webinars, this is the first time we are having such a kind of a webinar with people beyond the state of Odisha, across the globe, across the country. So this year we have chosen Koraput. Koraput is, to brief in a minute, Koraput is in the southern part of Odisha. It's towards the northern part of the Eastern Ghats. its topography and the ecological diversity is so conducive to the tribes over there. We have one of the largest group of primitive tribes living in Koraput. And today Koraput, um, uh, once still called the Kashmir of Odisha, is now being affected by large-scale mining, large-scale development activities, forced migrations, change in crop management, change in the soil management, um, and a lot of it. So basically, this yesterday's, Rajesh and his team has been kind enough. We have actually have 8 sub-themes for this Congress, out of which Rajesh and his team have picked up 2 sub-themes. Yesterday we had environment, climate change, and tribes, and today we have environment, tribal food security, and livelihood. This is what I had to say, a brief introduction about what we are doing and what we expect this webinar to happen. Next, to you, Rajesh.
Thank you so much, Mr. Baxipatra. We now have the honor of welcoming Professor Palita. And please, the floor is yours for 5 minutes, and we would love to hear your thoughts. And please don't mind if I'm rude and tell you that you have only about a minute left.
Thank you, Rajesh. So good evening to all friends. At the outset, I must be thankful to Sri Bhrugu Baxipatra from Odisha, Secretary Odisha Environment Congress, and Rajesh Kasturirangan and his team for organizing such a nice webinar, attracting people from far and wide. And I think I should start where Mr. Bhrugu Baxipatra has left. He has already told why it was decided to be Koraput. Friends, we are living in a time when this is geologically called Anthropocene. And ecologically, we are passing through a period that is called climate change. Not that climate change has not taken place earlier, but the present climate change is anthropogenically controlled. And perhaps because of this, it would be right to say this is Anthropocene. And impact of climate change is seen everywhere. And everybody is hit with climate change. But particularly when we come to tribes who are completely a part of nature, dependent on nature, they are most hit. And Koraput region, which is now divided into 4 districts, is a full of biodiversity and resources. And it is also abode of most ancient tribes of human beings, the tribes. Out of 62 tribes of Odisha, which have the largest concentration of tribes in India also, we have around 57 tribes in Koraput. Ecologically, it is known that these tribes have preserved varieties of rice, millet, variety of plant resources since ancient times. Carbon 4 dating says that Saura and Gadava are 2 ancient tribes who have kept the rice, they have started rice here. And now the FAO has recognized Koraput as the secondary center of rice, and this is one of the important centers worldwide which is known from ecological importance. And first I should say that how it is hit. In 1955, the Central Rice Research Institute conducted a survey in Koraput, and particularly it is known as Jaipur Tract. This Jaipur Tract, which covers major part of Koraput, some part of Vijayanagaram, some part of Jharkhand. This traditionally there is rice cultivation, and at that time they got 1500 plus rice varieties. And these are all contributed by tribal farmers, mostly Bonda, Gadaba, Saura, and many other tribes. But 40 years after, when Central Rice Research Institute conducted a survey, it came down to the rice varieties on plasm came down to 250. So friends, from this you can imagine that in the last 60 to 70 years, there is a lot of damage, environmental damage, and livelihood has been affected of these farmers. And not only rice, large number of millet varieties. Variety of millet varieties are there which are practiced by the tribal communities in Koraput. This year, we are observing International Year of Millets. And millets, once upon a time, was not considered very important. Now, world over, millet is one of the important food in comparison to rice and wheat. And Koraput is a abode of millets, varieties of millets, small millets. And then Elusina corcana, which is called ragi or mandia, is one of the famous food in Koraput region and for tribals. But because of climate change, lot of change taking place, and it is a time to see that these tribal people requires protection and their livelihood need to be entered. And another thing, there are many underutilized food crops which are cultivated by these tribal farmers, many tubers, many other plant varieties. So it is a time that we understand this, understand their conservation practices, how they preserve. And Central University of Odisha, which was established in the year 2019, and a Department of Biodiversity and Conservation of Natural Resources, where I am the head and dean, this has been trying very hard to document the resources conserved by the tribal communities, what is lost and how can it become, genetic studies, everything is going on. And we have been taking hard steps to see that these tribal farmers get the benefit. And now Koraput is coming up in the international market and national figure. That means coffee of Koraput, this ragi of Koraput, all these are now coming. So in this
just
backdrop,
1 minute.
Yes,
Just
in this backdrop, Odisha, and I'm thankful that Odisha Environment Congress has selected Koraput as the bed, and Koraput from 2 points, from tribals, tribal resources, tribal food practices, and tribal food crops, as well as the climate change phenomenon, combining together. It is a campaign to awareness, and we want that scientists, researchers, policy planners, even government people should understand what is the impact. And Koraput has become a living laboratory where science is there, resources are there, tribals are there, and we undergo experimentation to see that how tribals are being accommodating to this climate change, and how we are taking steps, we the people, we the scientists, common men, teachers, and government, how we are looking into them to this laboratory of biodiversity and bioresources. I think this is the right time that we must introspect, we must ponder, we must think deep into these aspects. Tribal food security, tribal livelihood, it is in danger. And we require conservation, preservation. Thanks to Odisha Environment Congress for taking steps for having a large gala function here, attracting people from far and wide. And I am also in charge of this editorial process, and I see people from Delhi, Maharashtra, various parts, they are going to participate. And thanks to Rajesh and his team for organizing such a nice webinar. Hope today's webinar will have a broader focus on these aspects. Thank you all. Good evening.
Thank you, Professor Palita, and thank you so much also for staying on time. This is a great beginning. I am going to move to the next speaker, Mr. Satpathy. The floor is yours. So remember 5 minutes for remarks, and then I'll give a quick response to that.
Yeah, good evening, all. So thank you for inviting me to this webinar. Yeah, Pradhan is a 39-year-old organization primarily engaged in the development of rural communities in Central India tribal belt. And primarily it focuses on enhancing their livelihoods. Their livelihoods are constantly threatened because of changes everywhere, and environmental changes because of all the developments that we have carried out has affected them. They are the worst affected, I will say, because they are mostly dependent on agriculture, which is affected by climate change to a great extent. And the approach for their development, again, has kept them at the receiving end. Instead of taking their views in shaping their lives, things have largely been imposed. So results are also not quite encouraging. I am saying this not as a general impression, but we had done last year a study to understand the status of livelihoods of tribals in Odisha and Jharkhand. If I share some of these figures, I think it will be clear. So it is directly by interviewing randomly selected tribal households in Odisha. So their annual income is 61,263, whereas national average income of agricultural households, I'm not talking about all households, is around 1,22,616. So it is around half. The food security, 55% of households are food insecure among tribals in Odisha. And malnutrition among children, 50% of the children are malnourished. And 55% of men and 75% of women who got selected randomly were not able to read and write. Whereas we say that 80.9% male literacy and 64% female literacy. So that is the condition in the tribal areas. So what is going, and I'll not say that nothing is going on. A lot is happening in the name of tribal development, but the results, so we did it to get to see the real image and to make it a mirror for all in the society. So that is where it is. So what is going on certainly is not enough, and maybe certainly is not right in the interest of tribal community, because they are at this situation. So what can be done about it? A lot of resources are allocated, a lot of policies are there, constitutional mandates are there, but this is where things are. So our experience suggests that many NGOs have worked and have shown that their income has gone beyond lakhs, Lakhpati Kisan, and all these programs are there. But now time has come that when all actors have to come together and really make efforts to make this thing, make the changes happen at a scale. Otherwise, transforming a village or a panchayat or a few villages are not going to sustain unless all the actors in the system work together to really bring about change at a scale everywhere in all rural villages, tribal villages. So that is what is the need. So we have many model villages where impacts are there, but then that is not adequate. First is that. Second is we have to make development led by the community. That means considering that they do not know how their issues can be addressed is certainly not going to work. And that, like Dr. Amartya Sinha has said, that poverty is more because of capability deprivation than income deprivation. So unless any developmental effort is enhancing their capability to address their own issues, I don't think it is development, and it is not going to be sustained. So if
1 minute, please,
has to be the outcome, then they have to be the change agents. And it is possible. We have seen it. Like I will give one example. I have time, I hope.
1 minute left.
Oh, in Odisha, just one example. Under NREGA, earlier what is to be done was decided at the top. We went with an approach where people made the plans, and those plans got executed under MGNREGA, and they mostly made plans to access water because they are agriculture dependent. And it was done with the involvement of NGOs at a scale in many blocks to stop migration. And XIMU did a study and they found the results quite encouraging. So the study report also is there. So similar such efforts are required. Actors have to come together, believe in the capability of people and allow them to save their lives. That I think is going to be quite encouraging results. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Satpathy. Since you mentioned Amartya Sen's capability framework and you mentioned the statistics, so essentially half the income and so on, what challenges do you see from your work on the ground on enhancing the capabilities of tribal communities, right? Both in terms of what they see as their doings and functionings, and perhaps what you have as Pradhan noticed as some of the serious challenges?
I would say three things. One, the relationship among different actors, mainly between government and NGOs. Even though NGOs have concrete experience of transforming people's lives, there is still, I think, lack of trust between government on NGOs by government. Second, so that has to be built, and when they have come together, under Millet Mission also there are quite encouraging results, and under this NREGA thing also. So that we need to highlight and bring them together. Second is about keeping community at the receiving end. So that again is not going to work. So we have to make them empowered enough to save their lives, and they have knowledge. Of course, external knowledge is important, but not without involving them. Things cannot be imposed. Second. Third is about the belief system. Generally, if you ask anybody, what is the impression on a tribal? What would they say? That they are some people very innocent, very not that knowledgeable. So that is not true. Any livelihood activity that we have introduced to the tribal community, they have met the industry standard, whether it is poultry, whether it is agriculture, whether anything. But yes, what the belief that we have in the society also has impacted them. So many times in the beginning, they also believe that they can't do things, they can't learn things. Well, once that is addressed, we have experienced that they are not less skilled than anybody else. As I said, the production data say that. So these are the three bottlenecks which we have to consciously address together by joining hands.
Thank you so much. This is a great way to inaugurate the speaker series. I would like to now invite Mr. Gangaram Pailkra, also better known as Gangabhai, to be the next speaker. Gangabhai, 5 मिनट बोलिए, उसके बाद जो है मैं जवाब दूंगा आपको. Maybe we're having some problems. आप muted हैं. We are having, as always in every Zoom meeting, this is a problem that we have to solve.
I think he's unmuted now. I think he's unmuted now.
Yes, but I don't hear anything, so. I'll give it a minute, and then maybe we can go to the next speaker and then come back to Gangabhai if needed. Okay.
Gangabhai is
so what I'm going to
always in
say,
the field in North Chhattisgarh, so the network is always a challenge, I think.
हाँ
Yeah.
जोहार सर, मैं थोड़ा सा लेट हो गया हूँ, थोड़ा सा जी जी ठीक है.
आप शुरू कीजिए गंगाभाई, 5 मिनट.
5 मिनट में?
हाँ, नहीं अभी शुरू करिए, 5 मिनट आपको बोलने का टाइम दिया गया.
अच्छा जी.
हाँ.
नहीं, जिस तरह का देवजी से बात हुई थी, आदिवासियों की जो लाइवलीहुड की बात करें या जो भी इस तरह का एक बदलाव हो रहा है, वातावरण जलवायु की परिवर्तन की बात हम देख रहे हैं, तो उससे हमारा जो समाज है, आदिवासी समाज है, जिस तरह का जंगल कटने से और जिस तरह का जंगल में नए तरह की पौधे लगाए जा रहे हैं और एक तरफ जंगल भी कट रहे हैं. हालांकि एक तरफ कानून आया है, पूरा वन अधिकार कानून हमारे आदिवासियों के लिए है, बहुत अच्छी कानून है. उसके बावजूद भी जिस तरह का बड़े बड़े कंपनियां, पावर प्लांट, जिस तरह की हमला हो रहा है हमारे जंगल में, जिसके कारण आज हमारे समाज में काफी दिक्कतें पैदा हो रही है, जिसपे लोग धीरे धीरे गांव से उनको बाहर जाना पड़ रहा है. जिस तरह का जंगल से कंदमूल, जिस तरह का भाजियां, जिस तरह के बहुत मछली कह सकते हैं, जंगलों से बहुत सारे जो उनके पौष्टिक आहार की चीज मिलते थे, वो काफी खत्म हो रहे हैं, खत्म के कगार में है, जिसके कारण प्लांट की संख्या बढ़ते जा रही है, घट नहीं रही है, बढ़ जा रही है. लोग कहते हैं कि बाहर जाने के शौक हो रहा है, बहुत लोग मजबूरी से भी बाहर जा रहे हैं. एक तो एक बड़ा ये बदलाव हो रहा है. दूसरी बात, खेती का जहां तक बात है, खेती के लिए किसान हमारा बिल्कुल भूल गया है. उनकी जो पद्धति है, उनकी जो तौर तरीका है, वो बिल्कुल समझ में नहीं आ रहा है कि मैं किस तरह खेती करूं. और एक तरफ नए खेती के तकनीक जो आ रहे हैं, वो हमारे आदिवासी समाज उस तकनीक को अडॉप्ट नहीं कर पा रहा है. एक तरफ उनकी जो ज्ञान था वो ज्ञान के आधार पे वो नहीं हो, जिस तरह का अनियमित वर्षा हो रहा है, कभी ज्यादा हो गया, कभी कम हो गया, समय पे आगे पीछे हो रहा है, तो इससे भी हमारा एक समाज काफी परेशान है और ये आगे दिक्कत हो रही है। तो ये इस तरह का मोटा मोटी, बाकी हम एक तरफ पोषण की बात कर रहे हैं, कुपोषण की बात कर रहे हैं, एक तरह नए उनकी कुपोषण को दूर करने के 50 तरह के उपाय हो रहे हैं, लेकिन उनकी जो पारंपरिक रूप से पोषण को बनाए रखने, पोषण को खत्म करने के लिए उनके पास खेती की पद्धति था, उनकी जंगलों में जो व्यवस्थाएं था, उन पर हम ध्यान नहीं दे पा रहे हैं। तो ये हमारा समस्याएं हैं जो हम परिवर्तन देख रहे हैं हमारे समाज में।
तो गंगा भाई,
इसमें कुछ सवाल जी।
हाँ, तो ये बताइए, क्योंकि आपने जो कहा कि जो आदिवासी जो उनकी पारंपरिक जो ज्ञान है और जो नई तकनीकी जो खेती की तकनीकी जो टेक्नोलॉजी वगैरह जो आ रही है, उनको उनके उनको कैसे मिला के कैसे उनको दिया जाए, या मतलब आप जो जहां आप काम कर रहे हैं, वो जो आदिवासी जो कम्युनिटीज हैं, वो ये नई तकनीकों को अपनाव करने के लिए क्या कर रहे हैं?
जो है उसके लिए प्रयास तो सरकार भी कर रही है, खेती करने वाले को चाहे बीज की कंपनी वाले हों, चाहे वो लोग कर रहे हैं, लेकिन हमारा
reception is quite bad, unfortunately. Sorry about that.
अभी सरगुजा में 5G नहीं पहुंचा है।
Yeah.
Example of तकनीक अडॉप्ट नहीं कर पा रहे हैं।
Exactly. So I'm going to request that we move to the next speaker. Sorry about that.
जी।
हाँ, आप
हम देख रहे हैं जी।
हाँ
हेलो,
हाँ, सुनाई दे रहा है। अगर आपको कुछ कहना है तो कह दीजिए, नहीं तो मैं अगले स्पीकर।
जमीन उसके अनुकूल नहीं है, उसके अनुकूल हमारी जमीन नहीं है, हमारा गांव नहीं है, उस तरह की आप देख नहीं है। जानकारी बढ़ा।
धन्यवाद गंगा भाई। I'm now going to move to the next speaker. We now have Ms. Namita Wahi from CPR. Floor is yours. Again, 5 minutes, and then question.
Good evening, everyone. First of all, I want to thank the Socrates Foundation and the Odisha Environment Congress for inviting me to this webinar. So, when we talk about tribes, tribal food security, livelihoods, and so on, I think what is important to understand first and foremost is the fact that land is central to individual and community tribal identity, history, and culture. And the second thing that we must understand is that the indigenous or Adivasi imagination of land and environment is in the form of Jal Jangal Zameen as part of an indivisible ecosystem, which means water, land, and forest are not separated from each other, but rather they are part of an indivisible ecosystem. So when I set up the Land Rights Initiative 8 years ago and started working on these issues, I approached them in very much the same manner in which you have described, that how do we empower the tribal communities to be able to protect their rights to the land, because they are the only community who have specialized constitutional protections under the 5th and 6th schedule, as well as statutory protections under various tribal land prohibition, tribal land alienation prohibition laws, as well as the prevention of atrocities against SC and STs, where atrocity also includes dispossessing a tribal person of their land. I mean, there's a plethora of statutory and constitutional protections, and yet they were the most displaced and vulnerable communities. I mean, a simple statistic, scheduled tribes constitute 8.6% of India's population, but according to work that has been done by Walter Fernandez and many others, they constitute 40% of all people who have been displaced since independence from 1950 to 1999 due to various development projects, including dams, mines, wildlife parks, and sanctuaries. So when I set up the Land Rights Initiative, the first 5 years, we did a body of work first to map the scheduled areas and also to map the forest cover, dams, and mines in India. And so the first thing I want to say is that nobody's doing the tribes any favors. It is very clear that the forest cover of India, 38% of it lies in the scheduled areas, and so do the dams, because all the resources, both the forest resources and the water resources, are concentrated in the scheduled areas. What that then means is that most of the mining activity is happening in the scheduled areas. So according to our research, 70% of all reporting mines, 2,100 mines, are located within the 5th scheduled area states, and 89% of all mineral royalties, which is legal mining. I'm not even considering illegal mining, but legal mining comes from the 5th scheduled areas, and illegal mining is way more than illegal mining. So if the country is taking out so much wealth from the scheduled areas, and yet these communities are not only not benefiting from that development, but also they are facing the destructive effects, because when you mine, when you have a coal mine, you despoil the land and the water and the forest, obviously, in that area, and not enough effort is ever made to actually, restore the land. So nobody's doing the tribes any favors. They have clearly disproportionately borne the burden of economic development. But actually, about a decade later, now that I've been working on these issues, what I've realized, and especially in the current situation, someone mentioned climate change earlier on in the panel. I mean, the word climate change is not correct, because change seems to suggest that it is somewhere reversible. It's not. We are in a climate crisis. As the UN Chief Guterres said that, we're on the road to climate hell. And I think that if that is the case, then the only way forward is actually the tribal way of life, which is to understand ourselves not as separate from the environment. So then this kind of, the title of this webinar, Tribes and Environment, that's not how we see the world. It's rather that, we are part of the environment. The indigenous imagination of Jal Jangal Zameen as part of an indivisible ecosystem is essential, not just to their development, but to a very sustainable survival on the planet. And therefore, any climate imaginary of sustainable survival has to really bring this in. And to give you an example.
1 minute.
Yeah, and to give you an example, so I was in Australia in June, and as we know that, in Australia, they have some of the worst record of indigenous people protection. This is a country where they have recognized the indigenous. I mean, India was a pioneer in terms of recognizing constitutionally the rights of indigenous communities. Of course, it has taken us a long time to enact the Forest Rights Act and to reverse a century of injustice which existed in the forest laws. But at the constitutional level, the 5th and the 6th schedules were pioneering legislation as compared to many other countries in the world. But Australia now is focusing a lot on indigenous communities' rights, in part because they have realized, I mean, this is a country where indigenous communities were hunted for sport, right? So that is how bad their record on indigenous people's rights are. But they have realized they've had the worst bushfires this year of all previous decades, and they've realized that it is only through adopting the indigenous practices of managing forests that they can have a hope of controlling bushfires. So they're really depending upon the indigenous communities to control the bushfires. So I think I'll leave you with this, that it's not that we have to do something to protect tribal food security and livelihoods. It's rather that unless we adopt the indigenous imagination in the way that we configure vision of economic development and social redistribution, we are not going to survive on this planet. We are really, not going to, we are going to keep moving forward on the road to climate health. Thank you.
With those sobering thoughts, let me ask you a question. In your view, given that you worked on land rights, is there what are the specific legal measures one could take to institutionalize tribal practices, right? So that they have a legal mandate behind them and are not just customary.
So we have the Forest Rights Act, which is a very progressive legislation. We also have the Right to Fair Compensation and Transparency in Land Acquisition, Rehabilitation and Resettlement Act, which for the first time specifically says that tribals should be displaced for the process of acquisition only as a matter of last resort. And if at all they have to be displaced, then they have to be relocated as a cultural linguistic group, and not just in terms of individual displacement, because we have to understand that not only are they the most displaced, many of them have been displaced more than once in one lifetime. And given how traumatic displacement is, we can only imagine. Now, as regards the Forest Rights Act, I think the Forest Rights Act actually, if it is implemented properly, has a very good template for protecting not only tribal food security and livelihoods, but really is a template for working towards sustainable survival. But since 2006, we've had a considerable resistance from the Forest Department to implementation of the Act. There are many civil society groups and organizations who are working extensively in various states to ensure implementation of the law. I think in most places, the rejection of forest rights claims is over 50%. So there is still a lot of resistance to implementation of forest rights claims. Even with respect to that, the individual forest rights claims are more likely to be accepted than the community forest rights claims. But we have to understand that land rights are important, not just for individual dignity, but also for intergenerational equity. And community-based resource management systems is the way to sustainable survival. Therefore, we really need to ensure that the community-based forest rights claims must be protected. And there in particular, we have to ensure that women's rights are protected, because women, much more than men within tribal communities, are more likely to protect community resources as compared to individual resources. Also because within tribal societies, there is an extensive amount of discrimination between men and women within tribal customary law as well. Therefore, we really need to ensure that women's rights are respected as well. So there are existing laws that if we just implement. On the other hand, however, what we are seeing is actually a pullback of protections. There is a proposed amendment to the Forest Act, which actually the Forest Rights Act is supposed to supplant. But the government is trying to go backwards on what has taken a century and a half to reverse. Simultaneously, we are seeing amendments to delegated legislation to the Coal-Bearing Areas Act and to environment laws, which will allow the government to actually, overlook many of the existing environment protections and hard-fought environment protections, which are further going to threaten tribal livelihoods and food security. So we really need to ensure that the protective legislation that we have taken, decades of people's movements to actually enact should be implemented, and there should be no rollback of these hard-fought protections.
Thank you so much. I think that the sense of struggle has come forth quite clearly from your presentation. I'm going to now move to the next speaker. We have a few minutes now for audience questions. If there's an urgent question that you would like to address the three speakers so far, please type that into the chat window. This will also give us a minute to clear our minds, have the next speaker prepare their thoughts in their head if they haven't yet done so. But
hello, this is S.N. Patra from Odisha Environment Society. I just wanted to know if any application is made for GI tag to indigenous rice varieties of Koraput district. This is one. Another, the loss of genes of indigenous rice. What are the reasons responsible? Is it the rise of temperature or loss of soil fertility? If loss of soil fertility is a major reason, what steps we are taking to amend the soil?
Okay. So I don't know who can take that question. If not, if one of the speakers wants to respond to that, great. But I'm not sure if the requisite expertise is there in this panel.
So I was referring to sections 41 and 42 of the Right to Fair Compensation and Transparency in Land Acquisition Act, which recognizes the fact that if there is displacement of scheduled tribes, first of all, it has to happen as a last resort. And if necessary, if it absolutely has to happen, then the community has to be relocated as a community. So, so within that sense of community, there is the cultural and linguistic elements of that. And it specifically says that, community spaces have to be provided in the site where they are to be relocated. But as we know, there has been a lot of dilution of the Right to Fair Compensation Act of 2013. 20 states have actually amended the law to eviscerate it of its core content. Basically, they've done away with the social impact assessment requirements, and and unless for most projects. So social impact assessment requirements and the consent requirement has been removed for most projects. And without doing a social impact assessment, there is no way that we can figure out, whether this is a community that has to be displaced. So in a way, the law has been eviscerated of its core content by these 20 states that have already amended the law. And that's exactly what we need to not do. We need to keep the protective laws and not, dilute them, which is what is happening across governments.
So this is in response to Kavana's question in the chat. So now I'm going to move to the next speaker. Thank you so much for the questions. The next speaker is, let's see, we have Professor Deepa Sinha. So over to you. So again, 5 minutes for questions, and then a quick question from me, and then a response.
Thank you, Rajesh. So I'm coming into this issue from the nutrition side. And like we know, when you look at any data, you see that when you disaggregate it by social groups, then the malnutrition levels amongst Adivasi communities are the highest. For instance, the latest NFHS 5 data shows that 40% of ST children are stunted compared to about 29% when we look at upper caste. So this is sort of contradictory if we think about it, and of everything that the other speakers have spoken about, where Adivasi communities we know had, at least in the past, access to diverse foods, with being close to the environment, having the kind of farming systems that they have in the communities that they are. You would expect that they would have access to the foods that would keep them away from malnutrition. But of course, with centuries of the process of where they have been kept out of the process of development, and in fact, actively in the name of development have been discriminated against in a number of ways, particularly in their access to Jal Jangal Zameen. One sees that one of the outcomes is this poor nutrition status that we see amongst Adivasi communities. Malnutrition, of course, is a multidimensional issue, and there are a number of factors that affect it, but still one of the main issues is the access to food security. And in the case of Adivasi communities, it's not just about access to livelihoods and how much foods that they're able to avail from the markets, but in fact, access to forests, access to commons, the changes and the threats to their traditional diets, which are increasing over time, where we see that they've also been losing their millets have been spoken about, tubers and roots, various things which form very central part of diets of most tribal communities, particularly in the central and East Indian belt, are under threat. In this context, what we see is that the response, like in the case of their access to resources, is a response which is from the outside, which is not involving them in the planning or the design of the programs that are meant to be addressing malnutrition, particularly even amongst tribal populations. Because of which, what we see is overly centralized programs which do not address them. Just to give a couple of examples in the few minutes that I have, one is to do with simply the design of something like the ICDS program, which has a rural village in its mind in the way the program has been designed, that houses are close together, that you have a central location to the village where you can have the center and all children come. Whereas we see that a lot of Adivasi habitations have scattered hamlets, even with the different population norms. Although the population norms for an ICDS center is smaller in tribal areas, you still find that most Anganwadi centers are very far away for most children, and they're not able to reach them. Similarly, even things like timings, where you have communities where mothers are involved in many parts during a large part of the year in collecting goods, including food from the forest. Their work timings are very different, and the ICDS timings do not match those. They work as if it is an office, and mothers usually leave early in the morning with their children. Another issue that we see in the access of services, again, is to do with who the service providers are. And you find that usually in these kind of programs, particularly again ICDS, that if the Anganwadi worker is also from the same community, then issues of language, culture, just being part of the community results in much better service provision. But with these very strict norms of education qualifications and so on, we find that in many tribal areas, you do not have tribals working as Anganwadi workers, and the excuse usually given is that there is nobody qualified available. But what moving towards what does one look at as solutions in this context? I think something that has been the theme across the previous speakers, which I would like to reiterate, is that, of course, in the case of any community, but particularly in the case of tribal communities, what works is to have more decentralized design and programs. Even in the case of nutrition, there is a lot to learn from the traditional food systems that Adivasis have had, both from the perspective of nutrition as well as from protecting the environment. And these can be integrated into public programs if they are involved in the designing of those programs and not treated as subjects who are to be told what to eat and how to be clean and so on. But in fact, taking them along would really, I think, lead to much better design and programs, which many NGO programs have shown, like Pradhan, PHRN, Ekjut, and so on. Just the last issue, and my minute will be over. Certain nutritional issues like sickle cell anemia and thalassemia specific to Adivasis, and we do not have any programs which are taking these into consideration. So I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Deepa. So my question is that, Namita had mentioned 40% of those displaced in India post-independence are Adivasis, right? So can you speak a little bit to the impact of displacement on nutrition and in nutritional deficits, if you have data or if there's work that you can speak to?
Yeah, so there is no direct data on impact of displacement on nutrition, but like I said, you do see that various indicators of malnutrition, be it anemia, be it stunting, wasting, all these indicators amongst different age groups, young children, adolescent children, women, and so on, tribals do worse. And that obviously is related to now most of their food also coming from the market, and therefore their access to livelihoods and natural resources. So the imagination that we have of tribal communities having access to natural resources and therefore a diverse variety of foods also gets lost when they are displaced from their lands and their forests, or when the entire environment and forest policy becomes one where it is the forest versus the tribal, or the environment versus the tribal, but not actually the way Adivasis use forests is not destroying the forest like others have spoken, but you see that when they're displaced, they lose access to their traditional foods as well. They then become completely dependent on the market, on the public distribution system, which are not really enough in terms of addressing their malnutrition, because of which we see the kind of outcomes that we see. So a community which is not traditionally vegetarian, a community which has had very diverse eating practices in terms of the tubers, roots, the various leafy sag, the mushrooms, and so on, also ends up having a very a diet which is very cereal heavy, because they are once again being only supported by this very centralized kind of PDS, which is the same for anybody anywhere in the country.
Thank you so much for your inputs, perhaps we'll have time to probe and ask further questions at the end of this, once all the speakers are done. I would like to now invite the next speaker, and that was Mr. Ravindra from Wasan. And that.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Ravindra. I work with Wasan. Just to give a background, Wasan works in the rainfed areas. That's where we come from. And then we host the Revitalizing Rainfed Agriculture Network and the Odisha Millet Mission in Odisha as supporting it as a secretariat. So that's where my impressions are coming. I rather would like to focus on the agriculture side of the food security. So when we are looking at crisis in rainfed areas, we look forward to various models, and then the solution seems to be in the multi-crop systems. So that's where we find it's very exciting to look at the tribal crop systems. We looked at in several states in the country, and this kind of a diversified crop systems once it used to be. Now you can also see that in some certain places, but mostly in most of the places it is still not there. And then the biodiversity inbuilt into the crop systems. So that is very fascinating. And then whatever the solutions of ecological degradation that we are looking forward to now, be it carbon sequestration, biodiversity conservation, changing the crop systems from monocrops to diversified crops, everything has a resonance in the tribal knowledge systems and tribal practices. But no, the situation across the country is not so romantic. If you look at, if you leave out the forest food systems, the role the forest play in the tribal food systems, the agriculture systems, particularly the uplands, midlands, and lowlands. These are three types of lands which actually constitutes the nutrition basket of the tribal foods. So the lowlands are essentially paddy and cereals. The uplands are essentially the pulses and oilseeds and all that. The midlands are the commercial crops. So now with the kind of inroads of the commercial economy, the so-called offshoots of the green revolution into the tribal systems, the uplands are greatly disturbed. So there is a lot of degradation in the uplands, and then even the photo systems got disturbed. You see, even in Koraput, a lot of hills got barren. May not be just because of the photo, but because of various other factors. So no, the degradation of the uplands actually hits them in terms of nutrition because that removes the pulses and oilseeds out of the production systems. So today we are having some workshop with the tribal communities in adjoining areas of Andhra Pradesh, adjoining Odisha. So we just estimated in one panchayat how much they spend on oil. So in one panchayat, they're spending 1.13 lakhs in a panchayat every month on purchasing oil. All these are oil packets from outside, any kind of brands that come from outside. So the tribal food systems are no longer the way that used to be. I don't think we should romanticize it too much. A lot of dependency on pesticides, which is there in this thing, and then erosion of the some of the crop systems that used to provide them the nutritional basket, very serious. And this is all probably could be one of the reasons for nutrition issues in tribal areas. And where from all these things coming up? And another major issue is because of the varying climate, varying intensities of crops, dry spells, and all that, the uplands got hit much more than any other thing. There are crop failures, consistent crop failures, which are not recognized because these are very remote areas and all that. Now we talk about millets and all that, and we find great enthusiasm in reviving millets. But millets are into the ecological niches of the tribal crop systems. Millets are not monocrops. So if you don't bring in the crop systems and then millets into it, then we'll be perpetuating the same green revolution thing on that. So all these problems stem from, in our understanding, from the policies that we pursue, the extraordinary focus on the green revolution technologies. Even you see most of the tribal areas in Jharkhand, Chhattisgarh, hybrid rice actually dominating the scene. So there used to be different kinds of rices. Now you see slowly the 1010 and hybrid rice replacing substantially the areas in the rice. So the diversity is not as it used to be. If the loss in diversity basically helps them more vulnerable to the climate, because traditionally the crop systems are adjusted to the slopes. So the different moisture regimes in the slopes and different soil types in the slopes. The varieties were evolved over time for these kind of an ecosystem. Whereas the improved varieties are one varieties which are one basic parameter tested, that is yield, which is actually replacing in many of the states. This is a serious problem. So the PDS also the same thing. No,
One minute
nutrition
left.
rich diets are replaced by PDS, and then these are the areas where historically no investments are made. So these areas are rich in resources. They have water flowing down the hill, but they cannot use the water because there is no infrastructure, and the crops die because of droughts. So this historical neglected infrastructure development and the investments in the tribal areas is one of the serious issues. So the kind of investment that went into are actually counterproductive to the ecology and then the ecosystems of the tribals. So in a sense, no, we need to see what kind of investment that should go, which the tribal systems, the tribal crop systems need to be recognized as a distinct crop systems, and then investments made to strengthen them, which are founded on the ecological distribution and the way the cultures are developed around the food systems. So this is the combination of things need to be seriously considered in the policy aspects. I do think policy has much more to do with disturbances in agriculture, disturbing the tribal farming systems. I'll stop here.
Thank you so much. You mentioned a fascinating statistic, troubling, which is that each tribal panchayat imports approximately 1 lakh rupees worth of oil every year, right? So can you speak a little bit more to the how marketization is sort of making most tribal communities these kind of net importers, right? And what that does for their flourishing in general.
Tribal areas are not are there. Some areas, cotton has great yields. Cotton brought in pesticides and huge amount of ecological degradation and also vulnerability. So the places where cotton went into, I think you should correlate the nutrition status of those areas and then the cotton spread. That is one thing, and then that brought in pesticides and fertilizers. I think we should no longer assume that tribal is pristine, no fertilizers are used, no chemicals are used. That is not right. So across board, I see huge amount of. I'm not saying comparison to Punjab and all that, but there is substantial usage of pesticides and all that, and there is substantial tendency towards monocropping, singular crops. So that is not no useful for the ecosystem and not useful for the resilience of the crop systems also and livelihood systems. So the market penetration, uh, people do not have a participation in the market other than being consumers. So all the product goes out in the same villages we see. The rice goes out and they buy rice because there is no mills. There are no mills, and then mills के लिए 20 किलोमीटर जाना पड़ता है. So this kind of a market penetration in tribal areas is substantial, primarily to get the produce outside the tribal areas. Number one, number two, and in very high order, pushing the industrial products into the tribal areas. One should actually estimate how much of the packed snack food, goes into the tribal areas and the amount of investment that goes into it. Just on some 5 groups of food, we estimated today's mistake. We have workshop references about that. I'm talking about the bordering areas of Odisha and Andhra Pradesh. There are 6 crores of annual consumption expenditure that goes outside the tribal areas. There may be some kind of a overestimate, but that is the order of the consumption expenditure that goes. Tribal areas are rich, but all the consumption expenditure is sucked out of the industry. It's a big market for the industry. Not only on the input side, but also in the, just imagine how much of hybrid rice companies are surviving on tribal areas rice field. That's huge. So we are slightly, I see people are romantic about tribal areas and then oblivious of this kind of inroads of the market economy into it.
Thank you so much for those comments. So we have now finished the main, all the speakers have had their turn. We again thank all the speakers for sharing their insights. It would be great to be able to put them together. So we will be synthesizing these talks and using that as a document for the Congress itself. We now have a little bit of time for audience questions again. If you have a question, you can either enter it into the chat window and I can read it out, or you can feel free to ask it directly.
Yeah, Mr. Rajesh, I have a 1 minute observation. This is Dr. J.K. Panigrahi from Odisha Environmental Society. I think so far tribal communities are concerned, we are in a state of bewilderness. We are really perplexed in the sense the tribal people, they are not into the modern process of mechanisms of development. They are not into the technological advancements that has been happening. But on the other hand, what is happening to the natural ecosystems where they are living, the forest areas mostly, there is a deterioration so far the quality of natural ecosystems are concerned, and the productivity of these ecosystems are also declining. So in such a situation, there is fragmentation, there is degradation, developmental activities, mining, so many things are happening. In such a situation, the tribal people, their best practices, they have been having for a long period of time. These best practices are no more in operation. So they are also to some extent affected by modern development process. So what we are planning to do, actually what is our objective, it may be government or civil society organizations and others, those who are working in the field of development of tribal communities. Whether we want these people to continue there within the natural habitats where they are living for centuries, and we have to protect their habitats, ecosystems, biodiversity, everything there, the quality must be maintained. On the other hand, whether we should bring them out of their natural habitats into the mainstream and provide the modern amenities so that other people, among other people, they will also join in the ultra-modern development process. So what is the real option before us? I think nobody is clear about all these things, whether they should be left in their original place and whether modern amenities should reach them, or they should be taken out of, as in case of many developmental processes, eviction is quite common. Tribal people, they are being evicted. So in such a situation, we are perplexed what to be done for the real development of tribal communities, tribal people. What sort of approach, what sort of model we have to accept so that their problems are solved and they are also having the benefits of development process. So that is my observation. Anybody who can wish to have some focus or some light on this, you can please go.
Namita, I think you have your hand raised, so go for it.
Yeah, so, thank you for that question. What you've raised is actually the question that was considered in the Constituent Assembly. And, I think there were two sort of distinct views. So in our research report on the legal regime and political economy of land rights of scheduled tribes and scheduled areas of India, what we do is we trace the British policy towards the tribal communities, and that was based on what I call identity-based isolation. And within the Constituent Assembly, there were two narratives. One, the kind of narrative that you're putting forth, which was a development through integration. So this idea that you have to bring them into the mainstream, you have to, develop them. What you are articulating is what I call development through integration. But, the tribal representatives in the assembly, Jaipal Singh Munda, who represented the tribes within the 5th schedule areas, and we also had from the 6th schedule, we had representatives. They were very clear that the tribal communities want development on their own terms, in a way that protects the tribal way of life. So in other words, just to give you examples, the kind of development they want is health and education, what Deepa highlighted, that, there should not be malnutrition. But the kind of development that the mainstream seeks to impose upon them is very different. So for example, all they need is a road, a narrow road that connects their village to the health systems and, the schools. They want education for their children in the tribal dialects, so that they don't have to, so that they can, learn and what you call modern education, but in a way that preserves their cultural linguistic identity. But we are not seeing that. And what we are seeing, if you look at the Northeast right now, we are seeing these huge highways and huge dams and things being constructed. That is not development for them. It's in their areas, but that takes out resources from those areas and doesn't bring development to them. And that is not the kind of development that they want.
Yeah, what you are speaking about Constituent Assembly, that was 75 years back. Much has changed in the present era.
Which is exactly the point, that you're, for 75 years, the tribal communities have sought development on their own terms, whereas the view that you are articulating was one of the dominant views, and they have sort of resisted that for 75 years, which is why we've had the Forest Rights Act and we've had all these other laws that have come about, because they don't want to be integrated within the mainstream. They want development, social development, they want health, education, they want all of those things, but within preserving their dialects, preserving their linguistic and cultural identity, and not being integrated within the mainstream.
Let's, Ganga Bhai, आपका कुछ कहना है इसके बारे में?
I have something to say.
Please do go ahead.
See,
we'll wait for Ganga Bhai to intervene. I'm
in
not sure if
relation
his
to
audio
Dr.
permits.
Paningrai's question, when we say modern system, modern development, then we think that we are more modern to them, and there is a civilizational gap. One thing they want their habit and habitat to be protected. Where they are, it is to be protected, and the way of life should be protected. But when we take plans, programs, we have a generalistic view. For example, in Koraput, 300 houses were constructed when the people are evicted, but they came for some time, but left it because it is not up to their choice. So each tribe has their own way of life, own social condition. Say there should not be a generalistic view of each tribe. So, or all tribes. So there should be a separate view for them. And what Madam Y said, I also feel that they require basic facilities. Not that they want to be modern like us.
My question, Professor Polita,
yes.
What is the development model we are having just in front of us that we are following? Nothing of that sort is happening.
No, that's not there. No, that's true. There is no such specific.
That is the problem.
Tribal supply.
I'm going to intervene. I'm sorry. Yes. Just to see if Ganga Bhai can also say, I mean, after all, he's a member of a tribal community. He has a voice to offer. Ganga Bhai, अगर आप ऑडियो पे हैं तो अनम्यूट करके कुछ बोलिए.
हाँ जी.
हाँ.
मैं काफी अंग्रेजी पे चल रहा था, समझ नहीं पा रहा था, इसलिए मैं सुन रहा था जी.
नहीं
थोड़ा सा मुझे मदद करेंगे जी.
हाँ. So ये सवाल ये है कि जो आदिवासी जो कम्युनिटीज हैं उनके लिए क्या डेवलपमेंटल मॉडल अपनाया जाए. हाँ, इंटीग्रेशन या ऑटोनॉमी.
जी, ये बात मैंने अपनी बात में रखा था, कह भी रहा था हुई कि अभी का जो दो तरह के हमारा युवा जो हैं, वो युवा जिस तरह के मॉडल की ओर जा रहे हैं, और लेकिन जिस तरह का हमारा वो जा रहे हैं लेकिन कहीं ना कहीं जाके फंस रहे हैं। तो हम जब तक हमारा पुराना जो मॉडल है, स्थायी तरीका है, जो आदिवासियों की ज्ञान या खेती करने के तौर तरीका हैं, या उनकी जिस तरह क्लाइमेट पूरा उसके साथ जुड़ के, प्रकृति के साथ जुड़ के जो काम कर रहे हैं, उसको अगर हम लेके नहीं जाएंगे तो वो हम शायद जिस तरह का सरकार विकास के लिए जिस तरह का योजनाएं बना रहे हैं, जिस तरह का पावर प्लांट डाल रहे हैं, जिस तरह की बहुत सारी चीजें, क्योंकि उस दौर में हमारा आदिवासी नहीं भाग सकता है, हमारा आदिवासी उस लेवल पे नहीं जा सकता है, तो उस दौड़ पे तो हम भाग ही नहीं पाएंगे। इसलिए हमारा पुराना तकनीक जो है, जो जिस तरह प्रकृति के साथ मिल के हम काम करते हैं, खेती करते हैं, तो उस तरह की विकास की बात नहीं करेंगे या उस तरह के प्लान हम नहीं करेंगे तो संभव नहीं हो पाएगा। ये मेरा इस पे कहना है जी।
अच्छा, धन्यवाद। तो Manas, do you have something to add to that?
Yes, yes. This whole idea of whether to integrate them, not to, who are we to think about that? The basic of development is freedom.
No. Government programs are so many.
So that is where the problem is. PESA is there for many years now. Why are we not enacting it? PESA, what does it say? It says that they should be empowered to decide about their fate.
So what about the
government? Their rights are
programs?
Violated again and again. Why? Anything you see, any access to basic services, tribal villages have less access. Why is it so? To drinking water, to sanitation, anything you take. Why is it so? Why their rights are not protected? Why they don't have equal right to access everything that others are able to? So this
they have equal rights. Constitutionally, they have equal rights, but things are
Dr.
not.
Panagrahi,
this is where we need to focus rather than deciding their fate or this is what they should do or not do. That is where the problem is. The whole thing is that we are not thinking them as equal human beings. They are as capable as us or anybody else.
I'm going to ask Deepa and then Ravindra because they have raised their hands. So Deepa, please go ahead.
Yeah, just to add to this debate, I mean, just taking on from where Manas left, I think just 2 points that I want to make. First is that, you know, even having this conversation amongst, clearly most of us are non-tribal here, and talking about what is best for them is the problem. And I think that's what most of the speakers also said, that one has to really move towards more decentralized ways, even models of development, where people whose lives are getting affected have some say in how their lives will be affected by decisions being made in the name of development for them and for others. I think if once we accept that principle, different models will work out. The tribal in Chhattisgarh might not want the same thing as the tribal in Nagaland. The tribal in Nagaland might not want the same thing as the tribal in the desert area in Rajasthan. So even if there is no one tribal, there is no one rural. It is a large, diverse country, and it's about how we can give everyone a voice. And we do still need to speak separately about the rights of tribals, because they have been communities which have been neglected and discriminated against for a very long period of time in the name of overall development, and therefore one is speaking up in their favor or whatever, standing with them in their struggles. The second point I want to make is also, I think Ravindra or somebody said it, this whole thing about what is the mainstream as well. Clearly, now with concerns of environment and climate change and protecting our development, protecting the world as we know it, suddenly the tribal lifestyles look very attractive to us. We want to protect it. Even that is problematic. I think, you know, it is a to and fro. There are things for us to learn from that kind of culture and lifestyle, which they're able to protect. But it comes down to them being equal citizens and having not been given that equal citizenship for so long, to be prioritized, given extra resources, and allowing them to decide ultimately what kind of development they want.
So I know that Ravindra had raised his hand earlier. I'm going to let him comment, and then we have a new question, because this is a debate that can go on for next 10 years and not stop. Right? So
I have a simple question. So what is the mainstream? So if I go to Thermal Rampur, for me the mainstream is the travel economy. So how that needs to develop with their choice. So this idea of the mainstream, if you look at it geographically, it is distinct, like Deepa said. So we need to have a different idea of mainstream, and then in the tribal areas, what is how the other non-mainstream in the tribal areas integrates with the tribal areas. The tribals must have a choice. No, I think that is.
Thank you so much. So now we're going to move to a new question, hopefully. Sangamitra, please go ahead and ask.
Thank you. Hello.
We can hear you.
Yeah. Being from a tribal university, that is Kalinga Institute of Social Science, where right now 35,000 tribal students are there. And also almost every year we are facing above 1 lakh parents and we're interacting. I have some questions, and in my place there are all anthropologists, big anthropologists. So every day we are also in debate of these things. So I think we are building narratives like they need development. That was also our narrative. Now also we are saying that we need to protect their culture. They need to stay with their ecosystem. That also is our narrative, because when we interact with youths and their parents, very recently I can share one example. One boy told of a master level, told how many times, why you are uttering that word tribal, how many times you will say a tribal, you are depriving me from my human rights. So we are also individuals, and before tribal we are human beings. And some of my friends who are also working in this sector and they are tribals, they always ask me, Sangamitra, before 50 years, 20 years, 30 years, where you people are living, whether that areas are not full of green things, and you are not having all traditional food and all those things. If you people can adopt something, and when it is coming to tribal, why all pressures on us? So I'm also confused. In different forum also we are debating but not getting anything concrete. Actually when we are saying that I am also agree with Ravindra sir, what he told, why we are saying that this is the mainstream. For them also tribal where they are living, that is also a mainstream. That's also true. But where we are really what we are really building for them, and why we all are crying for them when they need a separate they need a different kind of thing. They are also happy with the development having, they are coming to receive education to urban, and I can see the happy faces every day. They are very much happy.
Can you
So,
please, I think this is a long question, so maybe we can, if you could just ask a specific question.
My question is whether we should put all the pressures on tribals to safeguard our climate, environment, whatever things.
Yeah. Maybe one answer, one or two quick responses to it, because we are now running out of time.
Hello. Hello, can I speak? Hello. Can I speak?
Sorry, who is this?
I am Dr. Nimai Mishra from OUT, retired professor and a member of Environment Society, Odisha Environment Society. I have been associated with Pragati Koraput, one NGO working in Koraput. My one suggestion is, in order to improve the livelihood of tribal community, we have to shift to farming system approach than to cropping system approach or single crop or monocrop or the single system approach. And then we have to depend on solar system of irrigation, so that irrigation can be enhanced in a lot of area, and many possibilities can be adopted, so that tribal can be self-sufficient.
Thank you. If somebody wants a quick response to Sangamitra's question, that would be great. And then we'll break.
Yeah, I have a short response to Sanghamitra. So these tribal people, they have become voiceless. I think their voice is unheard. The voice the mainstream, so-called mainstream, is having in comparison to that, their culture, their lifestyle, their livelihood, everything. So that is remaining away from the so-called mainstream. That's why. So this question is being raised. Why are you addressing them as tribes?
Thank you so much. Namita, you have a...
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify, Sanghamitra, that I don't think any of us believe that tribes have the tribal people have the responsibility for climate change. That's not what I was saying at all. What I was saying is that the indigenous way of life, or the Adivasi way of life, where we don't see ourselves as separate from the environment, we don't see ourselves above the environment, we don't, sort of shape the world and the environment to our purposes, but rather realize that we are a small part of a larger ecosystem, where Jal Jangal Zameen is part of an indivisible ecosystem. That is the approach that we can learn from the indigenous communities and apply to our models of economic development going forward, which seem to be very much focused on capital formation, industrialization, and urbanization, because that is not sustainable. That we are on the road to climate hell. I mean, according to some estimates, it's going to be less than 3 decades for complete climate devastation. So unless we do a lot of things right now. And what I was saying is that we need to learn from the indigenous way of life, because currently the responses to climate crisis are more technocratic in nature. And I don't think the technocratic solutions are going to work, as well as understanding and realizing how to have sustainable survival based on this understanding of land, water, forest as an indivisible ecosystem. And in terms of a concrete suggestion, I would say that implementation of the Forest Rights Act, securing land rights of tribal communities, is absolutely crucial. Now, of course, it is not necessary that just because you secure land rights that people have to stay on the land. Younger generations have different aspirations. They can have that, but at least they will have the food security and the livelihood security that they need for them to have those aspirations in the first place. And that is for them to decide. But their rights need to be secured, because currently they are not secured. For example, in Jharkhand, where most of the coal, Jharkhand, Odisha, where a lot of the coal is coming from, it's the government, even if it's coming under the 5th schedule, even if there are tribal land alienation prohibition laws, it doesn't apply to the Land Acquisition Act. So if the state wants to mine coal, it can go ahead and displace whatever the protective laws might be. So what we need to ensure is that the rights of the people are protected even against the state. And once coal mining happens, especially because of privatization of coal mining, the record of those companies is even worse in terms of restoring of the land. So that's what I meant, that we need to protect those rights and then let the tribal people decide for themselves what they want to do.
Manas?
I just had a brief response. I think Sanghamitra understood that what we are saying is we are making them responsible for combating climate change. It is not so. Whenever there is a crisis, the weakest gets affected the most. So on a priority, we need to ensure that they adapt to the change much better than anybody else, because they are getting affected the most. So it is all about building their capability to adapt with the change sooner.
Thank you. Thank you. Ganga bhai, agar aapko kuch कहना है आखिरी में? Okay. Looks like गंगा भाई आप म्यूटेड हैं, अगर कुछ कहना हो तो बताइए.
ठीक है, मुझे कुछ नहीं करना है जी.
अच्छा, ठीक है. Thank you. So thank you everyone for the lively discussion. I know that these are difficult issues, and there is no settled answer. We are not here to provide them anyway. And I want to thank the speakers once again for sharing their insights. And before we leave, I would like to invite Mr. Baxipatra again to say a few words to close today's proceedings.
Thank you. Thank you so much, everybody. This was such a wonderful discussion. And after today's webinar, all of us in OEC, I think, will be very happy that we have chosen this subject. I think no better laboratory, I repeat what I said yesterday, no better laboratory than Koraput. I invite everybody here to please come to Koraput, attend this Odisha Environment Congress. Koraput is Asia's biggest deposit of bauxite. We have the biggest mining of aluminum bauxite happening. All the aluminum industry of the world are here. And the best of flora, fauna, forest, greenery, tribals are also here. So it's a wonderful project. And here, I guess, we will all come to know whether they want to get into bauxite mining and drink the contaminated water, or they want to have their own festival, their greenery, their forest, their climate, their god, their millet, their ragi, their bajra, or the rice. So it's all for us to study. Thank you so much, Namita ji. You must come. This is an invitation from all of us in OEC. Manas ji, you are from Odisha, so apanku personal invitation. Madam Deepa, please come. And Ganga Bhai, हम तो आपके बाजू में ही हैं. छत्तीसगढ़ और कोरापुट मिलाकर के दंडकारण्य होता है. सरगुजा से 4 घंटे का रास्ता है, जरूर आइएगा. और we will send out personal invitations to everybody. Ravindra ji has also worked a lot in Odisha. So thank you all, and please do come. Please participate. Please allow us to give all of you time to interact with all of us and with the tribes and with the region, with the people. It will help you study your subject better. Thank you so much. Thank you, Rajesh. Thank you so much, the Socrates team, and a personal thanks to Devjit. It's been wonderful.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Mr. Baxipatra. So we are closing, and before I close, I do want to thank my Socrates team. Devjit was already mentioned. Double thanks to him, but also Prachur, Smriti, Shivika, and Sanskriti. Thank you so much for all the help in making this happen. We will be synthesizing this recording and we'll be sharing it with you.